Hey there, folks. It's Andre, the Game Idea Guy, and we're live. And you already see the title. Going to go over Sungrand's Mario Kart video, do a reaction to that. Is also going to reanalyze the Switch 2 reveal trailer, just because there's some things I noticed going back over it that I didn't notice at first, and I wanted to talk about them. So, as you hear, my kids are over there yelling and screaming. Sorry, kids gonna be up and it's 10 in the morning. Nothing I can really do about that part. But I also didn't want to trample on what other people were going to be doing later today. So that's why I'm doing this one early. So we're gonna go ahead and start with Sungrand's video first. Once I pull it up. Let me share that out. There we go. So I'm gonna full screen it. We're going to go ahead and start. I'm not going to try to over talk him because I think that he says a lot of interesting things. And if there's anything that I think should really be keyed in on, I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. But we're just going ahead and give him a listen when he talks about the new Mario Kart game that's coming out for Switch 2.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
My
name is Jarrell. I develop video games full-time for a living. Today, I wanted to take a look at the Nintendo Switch 2, or if you read it the way it's written, the 2 Nintendo Switch. We will take a look at the Mario Kart 9 video that they showed us to analyze
links to his video
how strong
and the other trailer,
the 2 is compared to the Switch. So I will be approaching this as a developer. I've worked extensively on the 3DS, Wii U, and the Switch. So I want to point out the things that I...
So first thing we're going to do is acknowledge that he has extensively worked on multiple Nintendo platforms. So his knowledge base definitely has some depth to it. So we can take what he says very seriously, as well as not try to discredit him because people bring their fanboyism into conversations like this. So just understanding that he's worked on multiple Nintendo platforms, so he knows the ins and outs of many of them and how things are operated within them.
I see as a massive improvement that will really help developers get more out of their creative vision and to do more with their games. So I just want to make sure that I don't accidentally reveal anything that's protected by NDA. So I'm
Firstly, I want to say this would probably be something that would be a thing. Is it Nintendo Switch 2 or is it 2 Nintendo Switch? I would at that point I'd have to throw hands with somebody. But he did say something that a lot of other people have keyed in on, and he's trying to make sure he's avoiding breaking NDAs, which means he's probably working on a game for the Nintendo Switch 2 currently, or has a project for the Switch 2 that he's trying to get completed. We don't know for sure, but it's a strong possibility that there is, which means he has some actual background knowledge that he can't really share. So that's why he's going to speak in detail, but he's also going to speak vaguely about things going forward. So he probably already has a dev kit and is already developing for it, but he can't say certain things directly.
Very careful with my script here. So the first thing I want to point out is the universal use of physically based shaders. In computer development or video game design and with computers and graphics, a physically based shader is basically instructions on how a piece of geometry, like a character model, how that is going to look visually, how will it interact with other visual elements in terms of lighting and shadows. And a physically based shader is something that's able to take into account reflections from the environment.
If I were to sum this up, in essence, physically based shaders work in a way that shows more realistic detail to things, and not necessarily meaning that the game has to have realism, but we know how light works. We know how reflections work and things of that nature. So that type of thing is probably what he's more or less saying for people that may not directly get it, because I know it's technical and some people when they hear technical terms immediately check out.
If light bounces off other surfaces, it's able to express those colors in the lighting, and it's what has allowed games to look so much more interesting and engaging because of the more complex lighting. Something that I see here, the lighting
Good
on this
morning, Dark
car
Boy.
here is actually quite telling, or this model here is. This is quite low quality, but if you watch the high quality video that I'll put the link to on Nintendo's channel, you'll see that there's a high resolution specularity map. Now, a specularity map is what tells a 3D model how shiny does it look in certain parts, what are the surface imperfections in terms of glossiness. So some parts, might look like it has less shininess because it's dirty. I've noticed that on a background element like this, it is very high resolution detail, and I will discuss that in more aspects as well. But every single piece of geometry that I see here is using physically based uh, rendering for the shaders. Now, this is something that in general is quite expensive. So on the Switch, on the original Switch, you would be very careful with the complexity of your shader. The more complex your shader is, the more demanding it is on the hardware.
This is something I think a lot of people probably would have understood anyway. So for say the current Switch, something like this could be done, but it wouldn't be done to the same effect as what they've done here. Basically, you probably have to work on like I think the term is culling, like where you take part of it away, whatever's not necessarily seen on the camera, it starts disappearing, so that it could be in frame, or it would be done to a lesser extent. Maybe the textures would be muddier, probably. So it's culling is taking things out of making things disappear when they're not on camera. Let me not get my terminology mixed up. So for the current Switch, to say if you were looking at this, it would probably have much muddier looking textures. Like it, not like it would be a drastic drop in change because of the art style of the game, but just based on what he's saying, more than likely it wouldn't look as clear. That's about what I'm getting from it. And if anybody knows any better, they can correct me.
The more
What's up, RJ8?
frame drops you have, you get less performance out of the machine because physically based shaders are more expensive to render. But what I'm seeing here is everything is physically based. You see the glossiness on the cart here, on the wheels. Now, this is a very subtle detail, but it is very important to notice this. And it can be quite hard to notice this, but Mario is actually receiving reflections from the ground here. If you have a look at the bottom of his face, you see it's quite warm and yellow. Even the bottom of his gloves, that means that they are actually accepting the reflections of the ground here. In this section here, you see extensive use of squash and stretch, which is what I was hoping we would see after Mario Wonder showed us such expressive animations for that game. So I'm really happy to see that sort of expressive animation that's just so interesting to look at. Something that is very important to note here is the use of very high resolution ground textures on Mario Kart 8 versus what we see here, which we'll be calling Mario Kart 9. The texture.
Now, looking at the two side by side, and I made the bad call of just discounting the other game as Mario Kart 8, like them just running it, and I didn't really pay attention to it at first, and that was my bad. But when you look at it, looking at Mario Kart 8 versus 9 or whatever, he's calling it 9, so we'll just say 9 for this example. But when you say 9, you look at the you can basically see the texture of the ground. Like you can tell that it's gravelly and that there are divots in it that you don't see in this version of Mario Kart, where it looks a little bit more flat. More likely it was done that way just so that they could save space on RAM, because you don't want to blow your RAM up, and that cuts down your ability to process things and slows things down. Hey, what's up, Jazzy?
Resolution on the grounds on Mario Kart 9 is significantly higher. Now, ground textures, because they take up so much space, they are something that have to be high resolution. They can consume your available RAM very quickly. The Switch had only about 4 gigabytes of RAM. You know, some of it is reserved for the system. So if you have too many high resolution textures, your game will crash and you'll get all sorts of other issues. So it's up to developers to make sure that they do not use too many high resolution textures. So on Mario Kart 8 and other Switch games, you see that you have to be very careful. And in general, textures are not very high resolution. But you can see here in Mario Kart 9.
I can understand this understand the skepticism. I don't know why I'm getting tongue tied on my words. Because I didn't look at that video. When I saw he had the thumbnail with it, it said this won't happen. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, that depends on who's using it and what they're doing with the hardware. We can't really necessarily be confident in Pokemon Company and Game Freak at this point in time when it comes down to what will and won't happen. So I get the general premise of what he was trying to say with that. I still have yet to watch that video, so I actually have to watch it. But I do get the general premise of what he meant is like this shouldn't be a problem because you have the hardware capable of getting around this type of issue. You have more resources available, so it shouldn't be a problem. But we can't necessarily have that be promised to us.
Especially here, these textures on the ground are very high resolution, and it is not just that they are high resolution, but there is a high number of unique textures that they use. So the reason why they can consume memory so much faster is because it is not just one texture that is being used. There's multiple graphical files that are being supplied. You have one file that determines the color, you know, what the actual graphics are. You have one that controls the normal maps, how bumpy the surface is, but it can also catch light and express a sense of depth and shadows. You also have your specularity maps. You can optionally have ambient occlusion, which sort of explains to the renderer how something should occlude light, if it should exclude light to make it look darker in some areas. You can have height maps as well. You can have detail maps. You can have masks that explain where to have details. So all of those textures contribute to just one piece of geometry. And when you increase the resolution, all of those things in general, you would increase the resolution of all of those things unless you want to manually optimize. So you're not just going
the
and increasing
channel
the size
is
by a little bit, you're increasing the
let me
size
stop for a
by
second.
significant.
The channel is Sungrand Studios. This is a game developer talking about what he sees based upon the Nintendo Switch 2 trailer, the Mario Kart portion of it. And I'm just giving my general thoughts as we go along based on certain things he's saying. Because there is actually an interesting point later on into the video that I just don't know the exact location of it, which is why I'm going through it slowly and versus trying to click around and jump to it. But there is a particular portion of the video that I find very interesting. Is something that he says later on towards the back end, and it's more about how development is done.
Significant amount. So I would not be surprised if the RAM for the Switch 2 was between 12 to 16 gigs, because this is significantly more detailed. Something that is extremely important, that I think is the most important that we see here, is volumetric lighting.
Now, before anybody says, "Oh, we couldn't do," not we, well, Wii U Switch couldn't do volumetric lighting or whatever, it can do it. It can't do it as extensively because it doesn't have the necessary amount of RAM to do it at a large amount. It still can do it. You just have to limit it, just like any other thing. Like you have to find creative ways to be able to do the same thing and to represent the same thing on the Switch, but it's still doable. Before anybody gets into the whole, well, no, it can't do it. It's been doing it. You just have certain ways you have to do it.
volumetric lighting is not real lighting like we have in the real world. Nothing in a video game is what it actually represents in the real world. Volumetric lighting is advanced lighting that we have seen in many modern games that create a sense of density in the atmosphere.
Kind of makes you wonder if we already have volumetric lighting and it's been done on multiple platforms going back towards like even the GameCube. Why do we need real-time ray tracing? Why do we need ray tracing to do what we already have a tool to do? I know it's more to it than that, but most of it, what people talk about with ray tracing, is how it shows light. So if that's the case, and we already have something that does a very good job of it, and it's not super resource intensive, why do we keep going and attempting to do something else with it? Look, I'm not surprised by that because there are people that will act like it is, and I get the point that that's what ray tracing is supposed to be. It's supposed to be implementing real light, but don't necessarily have to do like you don't have to do it. You can simulate the light already with the tools that are there, and they don't take up as many resources and aren't as costly on the hardware. So I don't know.
Light passes through the density and it makes games look realistic, but not just realistic, it makes games look interesting because it makes it look like the air has density to it. It can communicate a sense of fog, or it can be used for clouds, dustiness. You can see here.
You know what? You might be
I can
right
tell
on
this
that.
is real volumetric fog. Normally, games would fake a volumetric fog with a number of different
you might
techniques.
be right on that.
In Mario Kart 8, what they did is they used just a basic distance fog, and that is very cheap to render. And then they used a whole lot of bloom. Bloom is a visual effect that is applied to the end image on screen that just sort of blurs the edges between the light areas and the darker areas of the scene to make it appear to have a soft halo. I'm not seeing that is significantly toned down. There's significantly less bloom here because now they have true volumetric lighting. True volumetric lighting is very expensive to render on the Switch. On PC,
you want more bloom? Are you sure you want more bloom? But hearing them say that just again went right to the point that I made anyway. It's hardware cost that can be the issue when it comes down to that. PC, you can basically brute force things because you can always up the hardware to just do more. But game consoles aren't made that way. And even though you have the Xbox and the PlayStation that are higher spec machines, there's still something to worry about. No, he's just pointing out how taxing something is on the amount of RAM being used. He's not necessarily saying power equals graphics equals power or whatever. He's pointing out the things that are done in graphics that can consume a lot of memory. And what people don't understand half the time is when stuff consumes a lot of memory, that's where you get all the chugging and slowing down of things. But again, there's something he's going to say later on that's going to make all of what he's saying right now make a lot more sense when you get further down into the discussion he's saying. You might have a point there. You might have a point there. I'm not even going to lie. You say crispy J Biggs Krispy Kreme donut glaze. I'm not messing with
Xbox.
You
it's not a big deal, but it is very expensive on the Switch. It takes a huge bite out of performance. If you try to have volumetric, you're basically cutting out, like, depending on if you're at lower resolution, you can minimize it to about like 20 to 25 frames a second. But true volumetric lighting at high resolution, if you're drawing at 1080 on the original Switch, you're probably going to force your game to run at like 15 frames a second. And that's just with the lighting. That's not taking into account anything else in the scene. So the fact that this is using true volumetric lighting where it takes into account the distance, the height. You can have certain areas be more dense the farther you get. You have light passing through it, it creates light rays. So it is just very pleasing to look at. It's very visually engaging and interesting. It's very expensive. That tells me that the Switch 2 is significantly more powerful because they want these games running. They would want this running at 60 frames a second, if you're running at 1080. I'm not sure if this will have 4K using post processing, but at 1080, surely they would want 60 frames a second. Nintendo products generally aim for very high level of quality. And to have volumetric.
Hold on, what? So Super Saiyan 1 Goku talking about while the advanced version is more power, you're slower chugs. But optimizing Super Saiyan. Oh, yeah. Optimizing and mastering the first variation of Super Saiyan, thus making it the fourth version of Super Saiyan. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. It's not about it's about how much how much output you're forcing through a narrow passage when you break it down. That's pretty much what it comes down to. How much you are forcing through a narrowing passage.
Lighting at that resolution, at this frame rate, is insane. I hope my explanation helps you understand. This is a massive deal. This is the most important part of this reveal trailer to me, is showing this sort of volumetric lighting, because it is a massive deal. It's what contributes to a huge amount of slowdown on games on the original Switch. So next,
there's a reason for that, though. There's a very big reason for that. And again, when he's going to talk about how he was developing some games or some issues he was having with developing games. And it's important to what's being said. So yeah, volumetric lighting is going to be costly on the Switch if improperly used. But we'll just move forward.
we also have the shadows being drawn at far distance. You can see over here, the shadows are still being drawn. Over there, you still have shadows. If you look at games on the original Switch, they will do what is called culling. They will cull the shadows so that once an object is too far, it's a certain distance from the camera, they will no longer draw shadows. That is because shadows are quite expensive to calculate and draw. And so to preserve the performance of your game, you would have shadows not be drawn. And you'll notice that very prominently in many games.
So this is the boring stuff that no one wants to know about when it comes down to game design and computations for video games and why all this stuff is needed, why it's important. These are the more boring parts that people don't want to pay attention to. And like when people like Mark Cerny even talked about stuff like this, people ignored it. And even the game engines that are on the consoles, Unreal, Unity, they ignore how the consoles should process things. Just so you guys know, they do ignore how consoles should process things, especially more recent iterations. They have their own way of calculating things and doing things that isn't necessarily going to work with the console's way of doing things. So that's important to remember. Oh yeah, shadows do tend to take up a bit of processing capability. And it's mostly, again, it's just the math of it. It's not necessarily what it looks like that causes the issue. It's the amount of math that's being run.
Especially if you look at games like Pokemon Violet or Pokemon Scarlet, you'll see the shadows being cut off very obviously. And that's just something that we have to do on the Switch because shadows are expensive. But I see these. I'm trying to see if there's a cutoff point here that's discernible, but I'm not necessarily seeing
J Biggs, you wrong for
a
that.
cutoff point here. I'm looking far into the distance at the terrain to see. It's very difficult to tell, but over there, that's still being drawn. Yeah, there's shadows
There's
there.
shadows far off in the distance.
This tells me that volumetric lighting and shadow calculation and drawing is now significantly easier on the hardware. And it is a big deal because these are high resolution shadows. If you look at Switch games, the resolutions of the shadows are usually extremely low and they look pixely and blocky. these are high resolution shadows that are being drawn at distance. Obviously, they can implement some techniques so that at distance shadows are drawn at lower resolution. This is a huge deal. That is massive. Next, we have.
He's basically saying that it's going to be easier for people to just copy and paste their games currently. It's going to be much easier for developers to copy and paste their games over based on the resources and how the Switch 2 processes things. At least that's what my understanding of it sounds like. We're still going to have the problems of games being bloated because of the game engines, but that's more of a later on type of discussion thing.
Even
hold on. I'm trying to get rid of this ad for a sec. Come on, skip. There we go.
The
ad just pop up in the middle
density of unique textures is very telling.
I mean, look, we already know that Nintendo are masters of their craft as well as Monolith Soft. I'm worried. I'm expecting Xenoblade Chronicles X2 to be amazing. This is what they did with the Wii U for the first one, and they're doing the remaster. They've already completed the not remaster, but well, yeah, I guess you would consider it a remaster for the Switch. So what they're doing for the next game, with how much they pack into games as is, that's gonna be out there.
We have so many different unique pieces of geometry. Models themselves, the 3D geometry, they don't really have that much of an impact. They are not expensive to store in memory. They're not expensive to draw a bunch of different things necessarily. But having the high resolution textures, having a lot of different textures, that is what stresses out the original Switch. That's what holds games back because they take up memory so fast.
The only thing I would disagree with is using the term hold back, because it's not holding back a game that's being developed. It comes down to how you are using the resources that are available. So to say holding back means that it's impossible to do. You're stopping it from being able to be done, when it just comes down to having to figure out different ways to do it. So while I get that it's easier for people to generally understand, because most people will not dive into the technological talk at all, it's still, for me personally, I'm always iffy when people say that, because we've heard that be said, and then we see stuff get done that people say shouldn't be able to be done. And all it takes is just somebody figuring out the ins and outs of the console and how to use it. So let me go ahead and continue.
That they will just crash your game. So the fact that there are so many unique pieces there are so many unique materials.
There's also one other thing to think about. Mario Kart isn't being done in a standard game engine. It has its own unique engine. And with more unique engines, you're able to take better advantage of the hardware. Now, if you're someone developing a game in a pre-created engine, you have to worry about the issues that engine has on top of what the hardware is supposed to do. Again, that's why I'm bringing this up for a specific reason. Let me see. Oops, I accidentally scrolled it up. I was trying to get back to your comment, Trinell. Yeah, we was probably using Maximum Xenoblade. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy what they can do with these. Yeah, that's true. No, like, people gotta understand, like, the console only does so much. Oh, the new one, the new Mario Kart's 24. It's 24 racers on screen at once, on the track at once. So, but again, that's why I say it depends on what the engine does versus what the console is supposed to do. Because if you're doing a custom built engine on any piece of hardware, that custom built engine is going to do better versus one that is more streamlined, like Unity, like I just said it earlier, like Unity or like is going to a more streamlined engine is going to have more problems working on hardware because it has things in it that work well against what the console is supposed to do. Thank you, J Biggs. I knew I said it. Unreal. I knew I said it, and my brain just said, "Nope, you're losing that word."
All of them have different textures. And of course, as I explained, there are multiple graphical files that go into one texture or one material.
I mean, look, we got, but if we're being real, it depends on how you implement it. Like, again, it comes down to how implement. Because I'm pretty sure Mario Kart 8 Deluxe could have had 24 racers on it if Nintendo would have deemed it necessary to do it. They just didn't deem it necessary to do it. So, and F Zero was what, 30 racers in general? Hey, maybe we'll be able to have 60.
There's so many different things here that is extremely telling that this system is significantly more powerful. We also have cloth simulation. If you have a look at the flags here,
He's talking more physics now.
they're all billowing in the wind. This does not look like keyframe or bone animation to me. That looks like real-time cloth simulation, and that is actually quite expensive. Again, on the original Switch hardware, it's something that you only have a little bit of because it is demanding on the processor. It costs frames per second. It's going to cause your FPS to drop. So you use it sparingly. But I'm seeing all of these flags have cloth simulation, which means that the Switch 2 has significantly more power for physics simulations. That means calculating vertices as they're being affected by other objects, moving other things. The wind is
all of it's
causing
math.
the geometry to deform. So the fact that all of those are cloth animating is a massive deal because, again, the original Switch could handle it, but not a lot. It took a huge bite out of performance. So having that is a massive deal. It is going to have much stronger physics simulation, and it's going to make characters' clothes look really cool as they're billowing and moving around. And we can have so much more of that in the environments now. We have, I already explained the high detail density, the high number of.
Ugh, gosh. See, I'm waiting for the specific thing, the specific thing that seems to be a major issue that no one usually takes into account. I'm waiting for him to get to that point.
Geometry and textures, the environmental reflections, but also we have very high poly counts on the models. If you compare this stuff to Mario Kart 8, again, you'll see that the character models themselves are significantly rounder and smoother. You don't see the jagged.
That is a potential possibility. Like especially once that game started to take off and take off, it did once Mario Kart 8 Deluxe took off the way it did. I mean, but you got to also consider that Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U sold over 6 million units on a dead, pretty much considered dead console by the general public. It sold over 6 million units on what people considered a dead console. I think it actually ended up around somewhere around 8 million, if I remember correctly. Yeah. See, I wasn't even looking down at it when you said it, and you put it there just as I was saying it. So yeah, it got around 8 million. That's a major thing. So it's Mario Kart 8 in and of itself majorly took off even on what people consider a dead platform. You sell to over half the install base. That is huge. And then to repeat it and sell high numbers like that on the Switch is unexpected and also something that no one would have considered to ever see happen.
edges of polygons like you did on Mario Kart 8. So obviously this will be able to handle significantly higher poly counts for drawing. This isn't necessarily a huge deal because the original Switch was pretty good at poly crunching. That was one of its strengths. One of the original Switch's weaknesses was drawing.
So yeah, you're right there. We never really got to see what a Mario Kart Switch will look like. And for like when I'm thinking about forming to compare Mario Kart 8, which was a Wii U game built around the idea of using 1 gigabyte of RAM versus the Switch having 4, we never truly got to see what they would be able to do with Mario Kart on the Switch. And part of me thinks that yeah, you're right. This did start off as a dedicated Switch version of Mario Kart. But once they saw what was happening, they said, okay, we'll move our development resources to the next platform because there's no point in releasing this for just the Switch when we could have it for the next platform going forward. I know I would have made that move.
Drawing transparent pixels or transparent like fog and fog particles, smoke particles, fire. On any hardware, that's quite expensive, but on the Switch, it was actually quite demanding. But the original Switch was pretty good at polygon crunching, so the fact that Switch 2 is pushing that even further is very nice to see, because that just means we can have more density in detail for characters. We can have more things on screen and still maintain a very good frames per second. That's the end user experience is just going to be smoother. So that is what I wanted to share with you. As a developer, I'm extremely excited. And for me, I'm personally frustrated working on the Switch because I had a number of games that were going to be larger scale.
This is where the important thing I was talking about would come into consideration. And he'll get down to the crux of it in a moment, but I just wanted to make sure everybody knew this was the most important part to me right here.
Scale with realistic graphic styles. I had those in development, and there's been a policy that came from Unity, not from Nintendo, from Unity.
This is the crux of a lot of these problems right here.
And John Riccitiello was destroying Unity, and they were announcing all these anti-consumer practices. They put in a policy where I could no longer use the older versions of Unity. So basically, the former CEO of Unity forced developers to switch their projects to newer versions of Unity. But the problem is the newer versions of Unity are very broken. Compared to older versions of Unity, the newer versions are way slower to use as a developer, and the end performance is significantly worse. So the games that...
So, if we were to take this into consideration, if the game engines have problems that are built into them that are hard to deal with for the developers, and you need to have higher level computing processing for your systems in order to work with them in ways that older versions of the exact same engine could already do, what does that start to tell you? What thing does that start to tell you that if newer versions of a game engine are causing problems that weren't there for older versions of it, where the older versions of the engines were a bit more flexible, what does that say to you? Because to me, that says that the game engines have a specific way that they are meant to be processed, which means that even if they are compatible with different platforms, you're going to run into different issues with them on different platforms. But here's the thing, Jay Biggs, he just said the thing out loud that Unity instituted a policy where developers weren't allowed to go and use the older versions. So they couldn't use the older versions of the engine, which they could be more flexible with, and that could work around whatever issues that they found with the hardware. But if you figure that out, if there's policies being instituted by the companies that are forcing game developers to use versions of the software that create issues with the hardware they're trying to implement the software on, how are we going to assume then that it's the hardware causing the problems when the engines have a specific way they are meant to be used, which will work against hardware that isn't congruent with how those engines are made to be used? The simple answer is you're going to bottleneck. You're going to have issues. You're going to have your games running and chugging slowly. You're going to have issues with resolution. You're going to have engines with issues with frame rate. You're going to find dips in everything. So even if the hardware on paper is technically capable of doing what the engine says it should be able to do, if there are problems within the engine that work against that hardware, it's not going to come out well no matter what you do. And if Unity was instituting these policies, what would make people think that these policies weren't being instituted with Unreal or any other major game development software out there? That's the thing to be considered. Nobody will talk about that. I haven't heard anybody talk about that specific thing that he said. I have yet to hear anybody talk about it. Somebody may have. I just have yet to hear anybody talk about that directly. Then again, I also haven't watched everybody's stuff, so it just depends on what I may have missed. But if you have dev tools being forced to be used a specific way, that's going to cause problems with the hardware, no matter what hardware it's on. That's why that's what makes it easier to understand why we're seeing so many issues on games that are going to PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, because the engines are meant to be used a specific way, and that specific way fights against the way the hardware is made. Now, I've said something like this time and time again, that the engines cause processes to work differently than how it would be the most efficient on the consoles. I've said that I don't know how many times, but I've said it. So if that's the case, if that is the case in and of itself, how can we say the issues are always on the hardware? How can we say the issues are always on the hardware if the very thing that you build the games in has problems? If the very engine you build your games in is causing problems on the hardware, how can we say it's the hardware that's causing the problems? But people will not accept that or accept you saying that to them. They're like, well, stop fanboying. But how am I fanboying when I'm just pointing out an issue? How am I fanboying when I'm just simply pointing out an issue that the development software that you are using is working against what would be most efficient for the hardware to do? And that can even be considered evident in some of the games that Nintendo themselves makes when they use these third-party engines and don't just build custom engines from scratch for all their games. But again, just me seeing that. But I don't need this anymore. He does continue on talking more about the issues with Unity, but I don't need really the rest of that, because that was the most important part to be considered. So we'll switch over back to the first look trailer. And I'll close this tab on my computer. So I did notice some stuff that I kind of missed. Okay, again, that was on me. Nobody else's fault but my own. But I did see some other stuff that I missed. So I wanted to go back over the trailer, if you'll be patient enough with me. I mean, obviously, everybody's seen this. I don't know how many times. Again, them screws at the bottom. I really feel like that means the faceplates can be taken off. Here's something interesting that I didn't even think about. That this stand for the dock, this stand for the dock can lean all the way down like that. Now, what purpose would that serve? Obviously, my mind immediately goes to what I've been saying before, where we still don't have information on the dock. But if you are laying that down like that, it almost looks like a keyboard. It almost looks like it would be a functioning touchscreen keyboard. And then when you combine that with what the Joy Cons are going to do, the much bigger, much easier to grip Joy Cons, with the infrared right there. And I didn't think about it, but these parts right here could just be like the pieces to allow it to glide easier. I don't know why I thought they were they would have be something with pressure points. I think they still could, but I think they're more likely just for you to be able to slide the controller around like a mouse easier, just like glide pads. But yeah, if you can combine the fact that the Switch 2 can basically fully lean back, along with this ability to use it, slide it, and somebody pointed out the Joy-Cons are drifting on Twitter. But you consider them being able to be used like very tall mice. And you have two of them that you can have on the sides. You can put them down and use them as mice. And you can lean that screen back, and it looks like a keyboard setup. I am still thinking dual screen is available as an option for use. I am still thinking that they did the reverse engineering the idea from the Wii U to have the console stream to having the console streaming to the gamepad, but instead of doing that, we have the Switch 2 streaming to the dock in reverse order. It's drawing everything on the tablet and then streaming it to the dock once it's connected to the dock through a Wi-Fi sort of setup, which would then allow the dock to process it on your TV screen. Again, I'm still thinking that that's the thing. Hey, what's up, J2? I'm still thinking that's the thing, just simply because the tablet being able to lean all the way far back like that is almost functionally useless unless you have situations you can implement it in. Like, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the dock itself has a built-in GPU. It doesn't necessarily have to have a game slot, because you just got to think about it this way. The processing going to this doesn't have anything in it to be, it's just a screen. It's just a screen with the controller built around it. So if they were able to do that with the Wii U and the gamepad, flipping it around the other way wouldn't be exactly the hardest thing to do. But I do think that they do have some sort of hardware in there. It's just not going to be like the most needed piece of hardware, because you would still have games running in single screen. But if you have it set up so that, because we've already theorized, myself and several other people from the Winging It podcast, I think Sandstorm, Jay, Jack, and Shadow, I think we've all at some point theorized that the Switch 2 is probably set up so that you can bring more PC games over to it with ease. What would be the easiest way to have your game have a mouse and keyboard set up for the Switch 2 if you can't just use that as a screen and have the game displayed on your television. Use that screen for a keyboard, or it can also be used for other functions. I'm still thinking they're doing that. That stood out to me once I went back over it and I looked at it, and like, I don't know, I'm probably wrong. I am probably wrong, but I still get that impression. I still very much get that impression. And even back here, like I said with the screws, I don't know. Maybe it's just for the function of taking it apart. I got a case on my Switch, so I can use a handheld. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong on that, because this one does have the screws at the bottom too. So maybe I'm wrong at that. It might not be for taking it off to replace it with a faceplate. I'm probably wrong on the faceplate thing. But the keyboard thing, I don't think I'm wrong on. I don't think it's going to be able to. I don't think I'm wrong on saying it can use dual screen, and there will be multiple functions for dual screen. Just like I said back in the day when Wii U was still Nintendo's console, Phantasy Star Online 2 would have been a great fit for it, because you could have just had the main game on the screen and then have the keyboard on the gamepad. Here you have a much bigger screen. You have potentially 2 different mice that you can use, which has multiple different implications for gameplay. And then on top of that, the whole thing can lay this far back. Like, you can put it down on a coffee table or a desk, and you can have your screen in front of you, and you can have that one down below. Again, I could very much be wrong. I'm expecting to be wrong. But if I'm not, that is a huge move. One, that brings back availability to be able to play DS games through Nintendo Switch Online, DS, and Wii U at that point. And on top of that, it opens up options for new games. If people talking about Microsoft bringing over, what's it, Age of Empires? I think is it Age of Empires that Microsoft has? That would be a perfect fit for if you can just have the Joy-Con and place it down like a mouse, and then you take the tablet out and the game still runs on the main screen. It's just being processed through a Wi-Fi type connection, a direct Wi-Fi connection being sent to it. It's something I'm so interested in seeing. I really want them to drop more information on this. I just don't know what they're going to do, but that stood out to me so much. And yeah, I'm probably wrong on these daggone screws. Now I feel a little bit silly. I have to check out my actual Switch. I was like, I should have looked at that first. But it doing this to me means way more. Because think about it. If you were actually playing the game, are you really going to lean it that far back so that you're looking down like this at it? That's not good for your neck. If you're going to have it as a stand, that's not good for a person's neck. And I don't think Nintendo would do that on purpose. There's more to this hardware than we know. Definitely more to this hardware than we know. And when I look back at it, and I was like, it was a head scratcher for me. It was like, why do you have it lean so far back? It doesn't need to lean that far back. You basically need it at like I want to say a 45 to 50 degree angle, so that you can take a quick peek down at it if you have it on a stand. But how many people are going to sit staring down at their table like this? Actually, it's probably a lot of people, because we got a bunch of people that do that with their phones now, which causes problem with your neck anyway. All right, JJ. Ooh, hold on. I'm sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to make you drop it. But I am not trying to have that copyrighted material play unfettered. Yeah, that's more than likely. It's more than likely that they decided to change it. But then you got to question, how did they do it on the Wii U? If without a game card slot, how did they do that on the Wii U? Because again, everything processed and got sent to the gamepad first through the Wi-Fi connection, through the Wi-Fi chip that was solely dedicated to streaming video from the Wii U to the gamepad. That's how they did it. All they would really have to do is just reverse the process. You put the receiver in the dock versus having it in the controller. That's it. You're basically just swapping parts. You put the processor that sends out the information in the Switch itself, and then have the dock have the receiver for it. And then you close off the connection to that specific thing. That would also allow for one dock to be able to be connected to multiple Switch 2 units for like some sort of split screen gameplay to make it easier on consoles instead of having one processing everything, which could muddy up the textures, even though I think DLSS would also help with that. But why just have one option available to do that? So that again, I'm of the mindset I'm more than likely going to be wrong. I'm of the mindset I'm more than likely going to be wrong. But I don't think that they would show that in the trailer for no reason. Again, though, probably wrong. I could very well be very wrong. So I'm it's just something that stood out to me and it sat in the back of my mind, and I'm like, that is a major thing that nobody's really thinking about. I know I haven't seen a single person really dive into this particular aspect of this thing. And people got to stop worrying about these. These are going to be fine. People got to stop worrying about those. These are fine. It's not just going to sit there and hang on to that. You have the whole bezel done like this in order for it to fit in there without having it be broken when you pull it out. So it shouldn't be an issue with it doing that. Don't tell me no. I'll get up and get it. Yeah, it's definitely an intentional thing. Is the whole lean back of that stand is intentional. That whole thing is definitely intentional. I didn't mean to click off of it so fast, but the whole fact that it leans back almost, you could say roughly 70 degrees. Oh, well, I wouldn't say 70 degrees because then we're not accounting everything. But the fact that it leans back almost about 145 degrees like that, yeah, that's quite interesting to me. It's interesting to me. But people worrying about those breaking, to me, tells me they're not going to handle their consoles right, and they're going to have people breaking them on purpose to try to send them back. And I hope Nintendo denies their warranty for that, because somebody's going to do it on purpose. It could be that. It could be a community function thing. Like they could be bringing back something similar to Miiverse. I really don't know. It could mean capture. It could mean chat. It could mean community in general. It could mean connection. So much stuff it could mean. At that point, we just have to wait and see it. I remember that. I remember that. I also remember the video of a guy hooking his Switch up to a drone and lifting the drone like thousands of feet and dropping it to see if it would still work. I was like, yeah, I wouldn't. That's money I couldn't waste like that personally. Even if I had it like that, I wouldn't do that. That's just nah. Oh yeah, it's definitely the first month. There's going to be videos of people snapping them and then trying to send them back to Nintendo after they done snapped them, and they're going to be without their Switch 2s for 3-4 months. They're gonna be without them for 3-4 months unless they go buy a new one. Because people forget that when a new console comes out, hardware is hard to find for replacement parts. You kind of got to let it sit on the market for a little while before you try to do something stupid like that. But I think there's not a whole lot more to go over for this trailer than I've already said, and even going back here, they showed it off again. They show it off again. That is nearly very flat. That is super low. If you put that on a flat surface on a table, that's about 145 to 160 degrees, which nearly makes it flat. Oh, yeah. PS5 and Series X smoking. And then we come to find out people were blowing smoke into their consoles so that the smoke will blow out their fans, not realizing they're potentially damaging the internal parts of the machines doing that. But hey, let people do stupid things with their money. That's on them. Okay. But I can go ahead and close that out. I don't need that still up. I've had that sitting on my mind for a minute, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm so interested in when it comes down to what the Switch 2 is going to do. I'm still trying to think of how games are going to potentially do dual mouse mode. Because that's something that I don't think there are very many games on PC that use two mice together. Now I do think that you could have like a game like House of the Dead where people use two mice for the two different guns being on the screen, click around, taking out the zombies and stuff. And that kind of makes me want Sega to go back and redo Virtual Cop and re-release them, since they redid House of the Dead and they did Overkill. And yes, Labo 2.0 is going to be a beast. Plus, you got Labo 2.0 potentially. Then you got Game Builder Garage 2 potentially. Maybe a Nintendo Land that shows off the different games. And I was sitting down thinking about different concepts of how the mouse could be used. One, you could have like a toy drag strip racing game where you slide the mice to build up momentum for your cars under a certain amount of time, and you just once the timer runs out, it just lets them go to see who built up more tension and momentum by doing that. It's so easy to think of how much stuff. Yeah, there could be a lot of games with a mouse and touchpad, and the touchpad for the most part would probably end up simulating either the functions of whatever the thing is in the game. Like if you're like say you want to do like a simulation game doing airplanes, like Microsoft hasn't done that already. But you could lay both of the Joy-Cons down. You can use that to adjust like you're actually flying a plane, and you'd have the touchscreen with all the different controls on it. There's so many implementations for that type of thing. And I know Flight Simulator would be one of the best ones for it. Because people go out their way now to buy special controllers for that for PC for Flight Simulator, just to make the experience more realistic. Or say you have a driving game that comes with a wheel, you could put the left Joy-Con in the wheel, the right Joy-Con could be on what would essentially be your gear shift, and you're driving. Then you use the touchscreen for all the other stuff that would be on the center console for whatever driving game is. So like you're doing like a truck driving simulator thing. Again, it comes down to there being a lot of choices and a lot of options with things that people can do, and the creativity of those that are developing the games. I see so many possibilities that it's just ridiculous. It would be a lot of fun, but it would be ridiculous. And I think honestly, A truck driving simulator that does that would be fun. Well, Trinell, the shoulder buttons might already be that themselves. So it probably wouldn't. I don't think there would be an accessory to make it a wheel. Probably one that would just make it smoother to use. Because we do know sometimes Nintendo's controllers can be a little bit rigid. A little bit. Now, and rigid in the sense that it's just going to be harder for people to get to, especially if you have much bigger hands. But with the size of these Joy-Cons, that's probably not going to be too big of an issue. Now, the one thing I wish that they could have implemented back, but based on the size of them, we don't have the speaker back in the controller like in the Wii remote and nunchuck, unless they're doing a Wii Virtual Console or Wii NSO, which they will probably make the wireless ones for people to use. I wish so bad that we had the speakers back in the controllers, but nothing that can really be done with that part. Oh man. Yeah, you're right about this. You're definitely right about that. I think though, if they could mandate for like the first year at least to have games that utilize a majority of the features of the console, you probably see some really cool stuff. Problem is being able to mandate it. It's like you can't necessarily mandate that because then you lose a third-party support. Maybe not. Depends on what size speakers they use and how they implemented them. But potentially it could. Just depends on the quality of the speakers. But if we're talking like the little cheap speakers that were inside the Wii remote and the Wii remotes, I'm about to say Wii remote and nunchuck, but it was just a Wii remote. We talking about those, probably wouldn't cost much. Or if they're just going to have that functionality work through Bluetooth where you can use like a Bluetooth speaker or your Bluetooth headset, then that would make up for it anyway. So that's probably why we don't see that on there, because you already have your Bluetooth set up. You could already set your Bluetooth up for that. So many things that would be fun to dive into and just sit down and imagine for this. But I think I've gone on long enough about that. I may sit down and write out some concepts and then do a stream for those concepts for what we know or what we have seen of the Switch 2. My only problem is coming up with these concepts and they not be doable. Like that would tick me off. But I would love a Star Fox game where you are playing as if you are in the cockpit of an R-Wing and you use the Joy-Cons face down with that tablet laying flat with like using it as the center control console, and you use the Joy-Cons to steer and fly your ship and aim and shoot. It would be fun to do that. But no guarantees that would happen. But I've rambled and I've had fun. I appreciate everybody coming in to listen to me ramble on. It was fun to talk about it again. Hopefully we'll see something interesting. We're likely going to be getting more details rolling out for games, since a couple of people have already announced they're having their games come out for Switch 2. So we'll see what the future holds. I'm still looking forward to that going forward. But I'm not going to ramble on too much more. Thank you guys for joining in. It was a fun discussion, and I think Sandstorm is doing his breakdown of the video tomorrow. Sungrand's Mario Kart video tomorrow. I did put the links for Sungrand's Mario Kart video for those who haven't actually seen it and you don't want my commentary on top of it, as well as the Switch 2 trailer. Those are down there. Several people, I don't know if y'all noticed that y'all are now moderators, because I went ahead and made y'all moderators. I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I just kept missing it for the longest time. So I went ahead and did it once I finally figured it out. And there is a pick your poison video that will be on for later. Around 5 o'clock today, there's a pick your poison video that's going to go ahead and be available on the channel if you guys want to watch that. If you haven't seen me post on Twitter about it, it's going to be serious smiling Batman versus or serious Spider-Man, and I'll give you the breakdown as well as my choice as to who I would face off against in a one-on-one situation if I was stuck with it. But yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you guys again very much for listening in. Keep your eyes